So a piece of what I'm going to say today is old news, but it's not that old for many of us. There are things that we have learned as a congregation since the George Floyd murder and the protests that ensued and the commitment to educating ourselves in its wake. So as I said, this is a Shemitah year. It began on Rosh Hashanah, 5782, and Shemitah means release. So it is a year of release, or another way to look at it is as an economic reset. Debts are canceled every 7 years, and this is the year that debts are canceled. When I felt aggrieved that someone who I thought should apologize to me didn't, and I kept wanting, and it kept burning me, and it kept burning me, what finally helped me to get rid of the burn was after 7 years, I released it. I said, you know what? 7 years, we release all debts. I got to let this go. And I had been saying that to myself for years and years because I knew that I was the one who was suffering, not the mumser who slighted me. But somehow I was unable to release that debt until my tradition told me to. Another aspect which is connected to debts being forgiven of the Shemitah year is that slaves are released. Hebrew slaves are released. The logic there is that the person was a slave as a result of poverty and becoming an indentured servant. So when the debt has been canceled as a result to Shemitah, there's nothing left for the slave to pay off, and he is, or she is, liberated. The other part of Shemitah is not exactly crop rotation, because crop rotation, you've always got a crop that is producing for you, but you just rotate so that you give the land a rest. Well, with Shemitah, you give the entire land a rest all at once for an entire year. The entire agricultural system ceases, it's released. And one rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda, even says that the owner of the land that surrounds the agricultural plot has to take down the fence, if there's a fence, in order to really hammer home the point that this is a year not of grace, where the have-nots get to come and glean as much as they want from the haves, but the haves and the have-nots both glean, because the land belongs to God, it says in Leviticus 25. It's not just a Native American slogan, it's also an Israelite slogan. The world, the earth belongs to God. So for 1 year out of 7, there are no landlords, there are no laborers. Everyone is on the same level field. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So objectives and consequences. It prevents a permanent underclass from developing, and it breaks the cycle of poverty. That's what happens every 7 years, and that really has to do with income. But when you shift from income to wealth and wealth acquisition, that's something the Torah addresses not every 7 years, but 7 times 7. The Shemitah of Shemitahs, like the Shabbat of Shabbats. And the year following 7 cycles of Shemitah is the 50th year, or the Jubilee year. We have stopped counting, so we don't know where we are in the Jubilee cycle. But every 50 years, any land that was sold in that previous 49 years reverts to the initial owner. And so intergenerational wealth is restored. We are the heirs to a Protestant conception of the world. Max Weber wrote about the Protestant work ethic. The idea that an individual's financial success or wealth is somehow a reflection of God's favor, or in Protestant terminology, them being elect, is a Protestant idea. It's not a Jewish idea. It's easy to think that it is a Jewish idea, A, because we live in America, and B, because we recite Deuteronomy in the Shema that says if we're good little boys and girls and are faithful to the mitzvot, then we will get rain in our season. And with rain comes food. That is communal. That is corporate. It is not individual. And although you have statements sprinkled throughout the tradition about God giving to each what is their due, those ideas linking wealth and favor in God's eyes never, ever were promoted as anything close to doctrine. Furthermore, no other ancient law system that we know about cared for the poor based on each year's crops. In most ancient societies, just like we see within Protestantism, there was an assumption that poverty was somehow linked to a moral fault, not in the Hebrew Bible. The Torah says that the poor are not to be blamed, but to be helped. And the Torah says that wealth is like a bucket of water on a water wheel. And the wheel just goes around. That's the way of the world. And sometimes the bucket is full, and sometimes the bucket is empty. And there's no moral judgment on whether the bucket is full or empty. It's easy to think that when the bucket is full, it was because we filled it, and that we and our merit had everything to do with the bucket being filled. The Torah says to be careful of that attitude. Beware lest your heart grow haughty and you forget the Lord your God. And you say to yourselves, my own power and the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me. It's not that there was no merit in the acquisition of wealth and power. It's that it wasn't always the full story. That line, beware lest your heart grow haughty and you forget the Lord your God, was glossed by Ibn Ezra as the following. Don't forget that you were a humble slave. Don't forget the hunger and thirst that you suffered. But even though you were a humble slave, God provided for you, nevertheless. The idea of the self-made man is a myth. It took a village. And the village that it took was often gated. This is what we've talked about over the past year. That for a variety of reasons, largely having to do with the one whose name I will not say in this sanctuary, after the Shoah, American Jews became white. We weren't before World War II. In education, employment, and housing, Jews were able to take advantage of their assigned whiteness. We benefited from the largest affirmative action program in history, the GI Bill, in ways that non-whites did not, and could not. Jews were allowed to buy property in neighborhoods where non-whites were not. It is true that Jews were not allowed to buy property in all neighborhoods. I come from San Diego, and the legend in the Jewish community in San Diego is that when UC San Diego tried to recruit Jonas Salk to head up their institute, the Salk Institute, Jonas Salk said, look, I'm not terribly religious, but I'm not going to move to an area of the city by the University of La Jolla that has covenants in the deeds that prevent homeowners from selling homes to Jews. So it was the regents of UC San Diego that got those covenants from La Jolla removed so that Jonas Salk could accept the position, or would accept the position, to start the Salk Institute. You see, it's not that we haven't been discriminated against. We have. But that shouldn't blind us to the discrimination that others have faced as well. This is a book that I've spoken about how Jews became white folks by Karen Brodkin. The myth that the Jews pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps ignores the fact that it took federal programs to create the conditions whereby the abilities of Jews and other European immigrants could be recognized and rewarded rather than denigrated and denied. Brodkin is not saying that Jews didn't pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And we know that some people's bootstraps were longer, but some people's bootstraps were shorter, and it was harder to pull themselves up. She continues, the GI Bill and the FHA and VA mortgages functioned as racial privileges and affirmative action programs that allowed Jews and other Euro-American men to become suburban homeowners and to get the training that allowed them to become professionals, technicians, salesmen, and managers in a growing economy. Jews' upward mobility was due to programs that allowed us to float on a rising economic tide. I would say, more modestly, that Jews' upward mobility was in part due. To African Americans, the government offered the cement boots of segregation, redlining, urban renewal, and discrimination. So we had a chance to discuss these issues this year as part of our initiative to educate ourselves in the wake of the George Floyd murder. We Jews were the beneficiaries of an ascribed whiteness in a country that was not colorblind. We worked hard, but it wasn't always a level playing field. I didn't do anything to merit being born as an American Ashkenazi Jew, but it's worked out pretty well for me. Being born in the 60s as an American Jew conferred upon me some other traits that I didn't do anything to merit. This is a part of the presentation that I haven't discussed with you, and that I suspect will be counterintuitive to most of you, as it was to me, and as the author of several books on merit, expect of their readers as well. This is a book by Michael Sandel called The Tyranny of Merit. My having or being X, right? A skill that I was born with, a trait that I was born with, is not my doing, but a matter of luck. And here he doesn't mean good luck or bad luck, just chance. I do not deserve having X. I do not deserve having curly hair. I do not deserve having blue eyes. If my society happens to value X, thanks to Paul Newman and other blue-eyed, gorgeous people, that's my good fortune. That's my good luck. but nothing that I deserve. So let me bring this home. That's me. That's me and my mom. My mom was 45. I wanted to show this picture. So when I did my interview weekend here, someone asked me if I owned a tie. So here is evidence that even before I arrived at AJ, I had owned a tie, yes. So this is my mom at 65. I think she's beautiful. I have never struggled with my weight. Yeah, I eat okay and I exercise, but there's lots of people who eat okay and exercise and still struggle with their weight. I don't. I never have. Did I merit that? No. I got lucky. I got not my mother's nose, but I got my family's physique, and I got my dad's head for numbers, and I got my mom's head for drama, and I got my, that's what this book is about, by the way. One of the attributes that this little kid got was his father's or his uncle's ear for music, and so you see his ear being a big music sign. Okay, now let's get controversial. Having talents, and this is Michael Sandel still, having talents that enable me to cater to market demand is no more my own doing than inheriting valuable property. I have to say that again because that's a tough one. Having talents that enable me to cater to market demand is no more my own doing than inheriting valuable property. The graph that you see, my friends, is a graph of different kinds of humans' IQs. Yes, what are we measuring when we measure IQ? And yes, who's doing the measuring? And it's culturally conditioned and flawed. Agreed. But Jews seem to have an abnormally high IQ, on average. And Jews seem to have a disproportionately ridiculous number of Nobel Prizes, which is the red line in the chart, compared to other folks. So I want to be really careful about how I say this. So I'll say it like this. Our high IQ is somewhere between helpful and necessary to achieve the success we have in many fields. And we didn't do anything to merit that high IQ that's been somewhere between helpful and necessary to be as successful as we are. This is a book by a guy at UC Berkeley, David Hollinger. Just tries to explain why Jews seem to have the traits that they do. In order to best survive and prosper in the diaspora, Jews developed to a higher degree than other European descent groups the distinctive set of skills on which the modernization process most depended. We, as a people, like most other people, were dirt poor for our entire history. Not surprising, but given the relative affluence of American Jews, we might not think about it, we might forget, we might not know it. But up until modernity, Jews were dirt poor, just like everybody else. We were not relatively affluent. But we had developed these skills that were worthless commercially until modernity, such as calculation, language fluency, record keeping, close attention to detail, a facility for abstraction, that would be Talmud, thank you, and the mobility and flexibility to move around and not deal with a variety of parties who often didn't want much to do with each other. Those traits did not confer on us any economic benefit until modernity, when they did. And here's why it all matters. These racially skewed gains, Brodkin is talking about economic gains, have been passed down across the generations so that racial inequality seems to maintain itself naturally, even after legal segregation has ended. Okay, so that's a little up in the air. Now let's bring it down. Coming to the realization that Jewish success, especially in the post-World War II era, was not entirely through our own merit, doesn't diminish how hard we worked. But it puts our hard work in a fuller context. And that fuller context forces me to admit that although my ancestors didn't contribute directly to the history of slavery in America, they benefited from it. And that acknowledgement creates a debt that there has been no Shemitah to forgive. Evanston is the first city in the United States to actually think through what reparations to the African American community would look like. And they started executing that program this past year. When I first arrived to this shul, I met a young man who was graduating college. I asked him, he told me he was working on his thesis. I asked him what it was. He said reparations. And I dismissed it out of hand. And now I understand that I shouldn't have. I was too quick to cast aside anything that felt too utopian. Not that I didn't necessarily think that there was some merit to the claim, but I just thought that it was so far from realistically plausible that we shouldn't even waste our time on it. Part of the reason I didn't think that there was no merit to the claim is because I am a beneficiary of reparations myself. Our ancestors took, claimed, expropriated gold and silver from their Egyptian neighbors on the way out of Dodge. And Genesis Rabbah understands that to be reparations, in addition to the reparations that Israel has received from Germany. There is a bill on the House of Representatives floor called H.R. 40. It's out of committee and ready to be voted on. What the bill does is provide a forum to explore and discuss the possibilities, of reparations. My ask this year is that we don't dismiss that discussion out of hand. We have stopped counting the 50 years of the Jubilee. But in this Shemitah year, how can we pursue justice and extend chesed for those who never quite heard the Liberty Bell toll in all its fullness? And indeed, Chazan, where's my Chazan? We have a song in the Jewish tradition that talks about liberty calling out. And so I have asked the Chazan to sing that first stanza for us. Ve'in sarchem kemo b'vat Ne'im shimchem ve'lo yushbat Shavunu ve'yom Shabbat
Deror yikra leveinu vat Ve'in sarchem kemo b'vat Ne'im shimchem ve'lo yushbat Shavunucho be'yom Shabbat.
May liberty be proclaimed for every male and every female and every gender fluid in between, every gender fluid person in between. Gemar Chatima Tova.
Shakar.